Lars Nootbaar and Jordan Walker were two guys that are young players that it appears the Cardinals want to make sure that they keep their hands on.
Yes, and I think that's completely right with respect to both of those guys. Jordan Walker in particular, the Cardinals aren't going to move, and I agree with not moving him. Lars Nootbaar, the Cardinals aren't going to move. I do think there's room to maybe consider it in the very small percentage of deals that are plausible. You'd almost have to be getting a guaranteed ace back for the rotation who's cost controlled. I don't think the Cardinals are going to get that for Nootbaar, but like with the international fame and the Team Japan and everything, the hype around Lars Nootbaar was pretty big coming into this year, and he's been fine. He's been solid, but he hasn't been like otherworldly to where I think that's a guy that you have to say is completely off the table. But I understand where the Cardinals were on him to begin the year, and if you add just like a couple more home runs to his ledger that he hasn't run into yet this season, his numbers look even better because the on base is there. The defense at all three outfield spots, it's there. He's their number 3 batter for the recent past. So I think it's very clear the Cardinals are high on him, and I'm okay with saying he's untouchable as well. But yeah, I think that's kind of maybe where it almost stops for the Cardinals in terms of guys who absolutely aren't moving. We've talked about Arenado and Goldschmidt. I think those guys they're not moving, and I guess they're untouchable because of that. I don't really know if you qualify it the same way, Andy, but it's just like they're not trading those players because they're trying to gear up for 2024, and those are their 2 best hitters. So those guys aren't moving anywhere either. You agree with that?
Yeah, I don't think you should entertain offers, at least for now. And definitely not for Arenado, and it's going to be tough because of the no trade. And Goldschmidt, we've talked back and forth, but it just doesn't seem that that's the move that you would want to do now.
Right. I mean, you can call them untouchable. I think it's untouchable in a different way, though, than a Jordan Walker. It's untouchable because, like, it's not going to make sense to deal these guys based on, if anybody's saying, well, they've got this no trade and, the salary for Arenado is pretty big. No, the Cardinals aren't messing around with trying to unload Arenado's money and then take lesser in terms of prospects coming back. So, like, it's just not where they're at right now, and rightfully so. So I think those two guys aren't moving anywhere. Goldschmidt, Arenado, it's not happening. We can move on to the other guys on the list, I think.
Yeah, and again, it signals a clear rebuild, and I don't think the Cardinals are at that point. So
correct.
You move on from Goldie, Arenado, and then here's what I'll say. I think Jordan Walker should be on that list for sure.
Yes.
I understand the argument for Lars Nootbaar. You want to keep around a piece like that, but I don't know. I would be fine with moving a guy like him for the right return.
It would have to be somebody beating down your door to get him, and they're willing to give away a pitcher who's just a bona fide stud.
Yeah.
Or projects to be one.
Yeah.
Because the Cardinals outfield situation has been a carousel, a revolving door for the last 6, 7, 8 years, and they still haven't really gotten it right. Guys that you keep underperform, guys that you let go seem to thrive elsewhere. It's been a really frustrating position group for the Cardinals. Lars Nootbaar is one that the Cardinals, at a certain point, you've got to stake yourselves to certain guys, and they have really done that with Lars Nootbaar. They like his skill set. They project, I think, more power from him in the future, and he's a solid above-average defender. So he is the kind of guy that you can feel good about in your outfield. But at the same time, it's like the Cardinals have also had situations. Think about 12 months ago when it comes to Dylan Carlson, the way the Cardinals viewed him at that trade deadline, where they basically said he's not going anywhere unless we're blown away. And now a year later, he's kind of lost some of that luster, at least in the eyes of the team. I'm a big Dylan Carlson guy, so I don't feel they've given him maybe his fair due this season. But now he's a guy that I think they would be willing to trade. I don't think that Dylan Carlson is untouchable. So maybe that's a cautionary tale of, if you feel like a guy is untouchable, but you could see a world in where he's just kind of okay, he just ends up being a fine player, don't wait too long to trade a guy every single time to where his value is kind of deflated.
That's where I'm coming down on Lars Nootbaar, honestly.
And that's why I think we both could see a world where, like, listen, if you took it the other way and said teams are beating down the door for him and you could get somebody really good on the pitching side, I'm not saying I jump at the chance to do that, but I don't completely dismiss it out of hand. I think the Cardinals might be dismissing it out of hand. So in their eyes, he's untouchable, even if for us we say, really great player. There would be a couple circumstances in which I would move him, though.
875-KTGR. At this trade deadline for the Cardinals, who is untouchable in their organization? Let us know your thoughts on that at 875-KTGR. All right, so that's 3.5 players that we're talking about being untouchable here.
for the team perspective, Lars Nootbaar, I think, is about as untouchable as it gets. He's not moving at the deadline. So we can lump him in there, but we offered our caveat to say what we would do.
See, I would not make him untouchable. I would entertain offers. That's fine with me if it means that I'm getting something good back. So that's why I kind of say 3.5. But who else? Sure. Who else do you think is untouchable? And by the way, you can go down to the minors in this. Like, it doesn't have to be current major league guys. Well, so I guess it's Mason Wynn untouchable. I would probably say yes.
The two prospects that are as close to that as you can get are Mason Wynn and Tink Hence, the pitcher out of that same 2020 draft class who's elevated now to Double-A. But for me, I wouldn't call anybody of that ilk untouchable. But I don't think the types of moves that the Cardinals are going to be looking at the deadline are going to lend themselves toward the Cardinals moving either Mason Wynn or Tink Hence. So yes, I'm going to say for all intents and purposes, those guys are also untouchable.
Yeah, I'd say those two for sure. So then are you saying, okay, well, Gordon Graceffo is still there. Would you entertain that? If somebody really wanted Gordon Graceffo.
Again, the Cardinals they're selling. And so it's kind of hard to wrap our mind around, the fact that they could also trade away a prospect. I think there's room for that deal, but look who's on the market potentially, like Dylan Cease, Shane Bieber, who we're not over the moon about with kind of his decline in strikeout rate. Is there anybody else from a starting pitching perspective that you go, this guy's out there, we got to make a run at him? And don't say Shohei Ohtani because he's a free agent to be. The Cardinals aren't looking to improve for 2023. It doesn't make sense to trade for Ohtani. We'll talk generally about him at 425. But is there anybody else on the market that you'd go, I'd trade a top prospect to make sure I get that guy for the next 3-4 years? I don't think there is.
There isn't much as far as starting
that we
pitchers.
Project.
Yeah. It's at least at this trade market. Yeah, that's why I'm not sure if the prospect pool is very intriguing for anybody else.
So I don't think that Gordon Graceffo in a vacuum is an untouchable prospect, but because of the moves that we project the Cardinals to be looking into, I don't think Graceffo necessarily fits into any of those. Same with Michael McGreevy. But if somebody pops up next week, I don't even have an example, but there's a controllable pitcher where suddenly, hey, he's available. All right, let me say this. Logan Gilbert for the Seattle Mariners. Derek Gould also reported that the Cardinals have interest in him. I don't know why the Mariners would move him, but they're at a point where they do need help with offense, and the Cardinals have a surplus of position players. So, if there's a Logan Gilbert trade to be had, and the Cardinals are, I don't even want to get into, the trade poll thing today, but we know the group of position players that we're kind of talking about. We got to decide, is a Gorman, is an Edman, is a Brenden Donovan? Are these guys truly untouchable, or could you float those guys in the right move for pitching? And if it's the Mariners and they like one of those guys, but they say we need a prospect as well to kind of replicate the Logan Gilbert in our system, then you go, okay, Graceffo? That would be the scenario where a Graceffo is not completely off the table. And so I would say no, Graceffo is not untouchable. It's just a very rare scenario in which I expect him to be moved.
Yeah, that's the main thing. 875-KTGR, call or text us. Who is untouchable in the Cardinals organization during the trade market? And as far as current Major League guys...
Let's do it, because that's where it's really coming from. That's where it gets interesting.
Is Brenden Donovan untouchable? I think so.
For me, he would be for me. I don't know if he is for the Cardinals. Do they group him in that kind of middle infield bucket with Edman and with Gorman and say, hey, one of those guys maybe ends up getting moved if the right pitcher falls into our lap? They might view it that way. I think that's a mistake. I prefer Brenden Donovan to both of those other guys.
Yeah, I would
protect him from a trade.
I would rather have him than Lars Nootbaar, honestly. I would probably
actually feel the same way. I feel like Brenden Donovan should be more closely guarded than Lars Nootbaar, only because I just like the consistency of Donovan. And I keep using the phrase, if you had 9 Brenden Donovans running around out there, I think you win a lot of baseball games. And I get that he's not a power hitter, but he's going to run into 12 or 15 home runs this year, maybe more. I think he's already up to 9. That's more than Nootbaar. I think that the positional flexibility and the versatility where Brenden Donovan could be a Gold Glover at any position, in theory, is also very attractive. And he's your leadoff guy. He's a guy who is getting on base at a great clip, and if he adds power, suddenly he's somewhere between Zobrist and Matt Carpenter in terms of the value that he can bring to a ball club on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. I wouldn't be trading Brendan Donovan. I would almost not even pick up the phone if that's where the conversation is. Andy, I don't know if the Cardinals feel that way. I want to be totally clear about this. I'm separating the personal, my opinion, versus what I am reading into it that the team might think. They might just say, hey, we have all of these second basemen or guys who can play second base, and they might look to a team like the Mariners and say, which one do you like best? If we can get to a pitcher like a Gilbert that we really like, I don't think it's off the table for them. For me, I would steer toward, hey, you like this Nolan Gorman guy, right? Because he's not as good defensively. He does have the raw power, but it's kind of hit and miss. Is he ever going to elevate to the perennial all-star level, or are the slumps just going to get him every summer to where you might get the 30 home runs regularly, but the OPS, you're looking at 750 to 770 instead of like an 8 to an 825. If that's the case, I do prefer Donovan there, and I would be kind of floating Gorman a little more aggressively than Donovan. I don't know what the Cardinals will do, but I don't know that they necessarily have as big of a preference as I personally do on the difference there.
875-KTGR, who is untouchable in the Cardinals organization at the trade market. And here's the thing. I don't think people would totally discount Nolan Gorman, even though he's been slumping recently. I mean, the power's there. His OPS is still a little bit around where it's
770, yeah.
72
it's about the same.
And 777 for Donovan. It's pretty comparable.
Sure.
Maybe you view the recency bias and you say, well, I want Brendan Donovan a little bit more if you're talking to a contending team or a team that wants to contend. But I don't know. Nolan Gorman with team control for a few years, you're not just buying this year for Nolan Gorman, you're buying future years. So I think there's still value out there, similar value to Brendan Donovan for other teams, and that's why I would maybe push them a little bit more toward the Gorman side, because I know that Donovan, for what I'm getting out of him and for how much I value defense in the Cardinals organization, I would much rather go with a guy like that than maybe Gorman.
And, you should value what Gorman brings to the table as well. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you got to unload Nolan Gorman because he's going to be a bust. I don't think that. I think for the course of his career, he's going to be about what he's been this year. You're going to have some really great streaks, and then you're going to have some down times where you're hoping he can find himself as quickly as possible. That's led to a 772 OPS with 17 home runs at the All-Star break. Those are fine numbers, but when you're not a plus defender, he's fine at second, and I think he can get even better and become above average. But when he's just kind of fine at second base and maybe fine at third base for a team that would use him in that capacity, I think you've got to find more elite level offensive play to really tap into the value of saying Nolan Gorman should be untouchable at this deadline. I don't know what the Cardinals project for him to be. They can't get this wrong, Andy. We can get it wrong on the radio and we don't lose our jobs over it. Yeah. If Nolan Gorman ends up being that dude and they decide kind of to do what we're suggesting and say, hey, prioritize these other players instead of him, nobody has the raw power of Nolan Gorman. So it is a dangerous proposition to just discount that and say, no, we'll trade him to get what we need. I'm not saying you have to do it. You have to get the evaluation correct this time if you're the Cardinals, because on a Rosarena, they didn't. On guys like Adolis Garcia, they didn't. There are times where they didn't see the ceiling playing out for certain players. We know what the ceiling could be for Nolan Gorman. We saw it earlier this season. You have to be careful about trading that guy. But, Andy, to me, should he be untouchable off the table like a Jordan Walker? I don't think it's the same category. No,
definitely not. So that's, I mean, we have those guys in that category: Jordan Walker, Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, maybe Lars Nootbaar. I think I would put Brendan Donovan in the untouchable category over Nootbaar if I had to pick and choose.
If you could protect three from anybody in the, let me give you four because it makes it more interesting, but I'll even take out Arenado and Goldie. Don't put those. I'm talking about the younger guys who it would be a little bit possible to have them have value.
So I had to pick four of these guys.
Four. Yes.
Okay, I'm picking Donovan.
I am too.
I don't know. I can't really pick Wilson Contreras because I don't know if I might want to.
No. Let's go with the guys who don't have contracts. We're talking about the young, controllable assets here.
Jordan Walker.
Yes.
Brendan Donovan.
Those are two.
I guess if I have a third, I'll say Nootbaar. Sure,
Nootbaar, and I'm putting him in there as well. Give me one more guy that you can protect, or do you even have one? Do you say no at fair value? I'd trade anybody else because that's where I am. I would at fair value. I would I would move these other players. I would look at a Gorman deal. Dylan Carlson. I love Dylan Carlson. I think that if a team is valuing him above where the Cardinals clearly value him, then it might make sense. Honestly, Carlson would be the next one that I would put in there, because I could see a world where, as much as Tommy Edman, I think, is a really great winning
That's the one
player,
that I go back and forth on. Like, I like Tommy Edman, but there could be somebody out there who needs a Tommy Edman and will be willing to pay some good money for it. So I think it'd be something to listen to.
Because if you're just going to outright dismiss the idea of trading Tommy Edman when you know how many second basemen you have, and maybe they consider Edman a center fielder now, I think that's silly, because I still am on the side of Dylan Carlson being a good one. And I also think you're going to have to maybe go out and get a legit third outfielder if you don't think that of Carlson. Like, if Walker can stick in the corner and Nootbaar can be in one of the other spots, the offseason, get a dude, and then your outfield is resolved. If that's how you feel and you don't trust O'Neill and you don't trust Carlson, whatever. If they view Edman as that other guy, I just don't in center field, because I think you need more offensive punch from an outfielder than Tommy Edman brings. I value what he does with the range and center. But Andy, over the course of his career, he is exactly a 100 OPS plus, a league average hitter over the course of his major league career. And don't sneeze at that. That's worth something. But for me, I would rather put that at a second base or a shortstop where he can play plus defense than say he's my center fielder when other teams have these young center fielders that just go out and rake. I just don't think you can commit to league average offense and center. And if you're doing that, I'd rather just do it with Dylan Carlson, because I think he's a more complete outfielder in my estimation. So if there's a team that wants Tommy Edman and you think he's a league average hitter, which is a fine thing to be, but not something that you call untouchable, then I would, in that scenario, trade him. But I'm not selling low on any of the guys from that group.
Yeah, I don't think I would put them in the untouchable category, or at least a whole lot of them, past Donovan and Walker and maybe Nootbaar. So other than that, it could be time to see what the Cardinals can get for some of those ancillary pieces. But let us know who you think should be untouchable. 875-KTGR.
And isn't that exciting? Like, to me, if I'm a Cardinals fan, that's exciting to look at this team and go, there's a lot of players that we think are good. This team isn't good. And so maybe a way to shake it up and allow things to organize a little better for the future is to trade and make a bold move. Like, to me, that is what could make this an exciting couple of weeks for the Cardinals. It could go disastrously. We could get that alert on our phones, Andy, that the Cardinals have traded one of these guys, and then we look at the return and go, oh, no, they got desperate, and it went bad. It went south on them. That could happen, but the potential of what could happen, I think, is really interesting right now. And it does keep me engaged in these next few weeks, even as the team potentially slides further and further out of contention. I'm intrigued by the idea of maybe seeing a bold trade for the Cardinals coming up over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.